It's John Robb here interviewing Glen Matlock about I Was a Teenage Sex Pistol. So that's a blast from the past, isn't it? I mean, I remember reading that years ago.
Well, yeah, Blast from Past been updated. It might be updated again sometime, but I just always thought in the back of my mind it might make a documentary that's got a slightly different take on things. And over the years, some people have been interested. It's never quite happened. Then I met a guy called Nick Mead, an English guy who lives in LA. But I met him round the corner actually. He's a mate of mine, and he expressed interest in it. And he spoke to a few people, he didn't pick up, and then he met somebody in Los Angeles, an American guy, Andre Rellis, who saw the value of it, and he's run with it. So over the past couple of years, they've been filming people, and I'd suggested people who to talk to who might big me up for nothing. And I'm kind of quite pleased with the people I've got it, like Debbie Aaron and Chris Stein and Stephen Paul on it, and Gary Kemp and Billy Idol and Rat Scabies and Chris Spedding, then and also Wayne Kramer, which is the last interview he ever did. And then I've got people maybe not so well known, but Mike Thorne, who was the junior A&R guy who signed the Pistols to EMI, and also Al McDowell, who was the first person to ever book the Sex Pistols at Central School of Art, although we did the St Martin's one before. That's the way it worked out. But Al, I mean, he became a big wheel in Hollywood. I don't know if you know, but he was the artistic director for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It's kind of big deal stuff. And yeah, and he speaks very well, actually. So yeah, I'm quite pleased with how it's come out. It's a bit weird watching yourself. It's a bit weird having Wayne in it, who died maybe a week or two after filming, and Clem, who's sadly no longer with us. So it's a little bit bittersweet. But
I mean, it's a story that's been told so many times, the Pistols one, and is it important to get this strand, your version of the story out there? Because there's a lot of very contradictory versions of this tale, isn't there?
Well, there is, yeah, and I always feel mine's been a bit kind of glossed over a little bit. I'm not like sour grapes about it, because I feel all the times that we've reformed over the years that they could have asked anybody in the world, and they've always asked me. So I feel kind of vindicated there. But it's a slightly different story, really. So, you know, how many times can you have Danny Boyle going on? And Danny Boyle's thing, I mean, it's a good piece of TV, but I told Steve, I said, you got a shocking memory, mate, you know.
Yeah. I thought I did enjoy it, and there was certain parts of it that worked, but I thought you came out of it the worst. The way they told your story was actually very neutral. It was actually quite insulting, really. It's sort of in the background of your own band. Yeah,
yeah, I know. I sat and I had a private screening because they wanted me to do some press on it, and I had a private screening, and I sat and watched it with Clem and a couple of friends and neighbours and my son, and I was embarrassed, you know. I told them. So, you know, and my son said, well, it's just like it's not bad, but it just makes you look like really two-dimensional, and it doesn't. And Paulie thought that about as well, that it was just not important. If I hadn't done what I've done, there wouldn't have been the Sex Pistols, you know. So never claimed to do it all, but I was pretty important. So anyway, this is my chance of saying what I think in it. I don't know. Have you got to see it yet?
Just a little clip so far. Yeah, right. Obviously I know the book, so I mean,
well, it doesn't follow the book exactly. It follows the story, but there's lots of contributions from different people in it that it takes on a different life. So, you know, I think it's kind of quite sort of uplifting and funny and amusing. You know, I'm not. Do you know what I remember? Many years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I did a gig with my band. We supported Ronnie Wood at the Shepherd's Bush Empire. Ronnie was a bit out of it that night, and I saw Pete Clark afterwards. I went to watch the band from the back, you know, the hall, and I said, and Ronnie was out of it, and I said to Pete Clark from the stand, and I said, you're reviewing this? And he said, do you know what, I like Ronnie Wood, so I'm not Cool. But the same night, two things happened. I went in Ronnie's dressing room. He's hanging out with Slash, who was playing with him and all that. And this little sort of, I'll say it, pikey bloke, because Ronnie would call himself that. Anyway, he came up to me and he went, "Glenn," he said, "gold rings, mate, gold rings." And I said, what's that? What's that mean?" And Ronnie said, "It means he likes you." But it was all part of his Romany or whatever extended family. But also there was his son. I forget his name. What's his son's name? Jesse was there, and he watched me. He said, "I really liked your gig," and he said it was totally not what I expected. I thought you was going to be all miserable and all that, and he said it's really kind of quite uplifting. So I've always, me, I'm not a miserable git. I'm not a shoegazing kind of, Franz Kafka was right kind of thing. Although he might have been right about certain things, but yeah, there you go.
I mean, I think uniquely, and there's only a few bands where every single key member, everybody knows something about them. John Paul, George Ringo, or the original Stones. All the names, and the Pistols are one of those bands, aren't they? But out of those four, your story is the least best told, isn't it? Often.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why. If it had been told, there'd been no point in making the documentary. So there you go.
I mean, what were you trying to say, with the guys making the documentary, between you as a team? What were you trying to say?
Well, I just think I'm trying to say that there were four people originally who did it. That I had a more important thing that I've been portrayed, and I'm just trying to sort of reclaim a bit back of that for myself and tell the kind of truth. Really, it's not. It hasn't been that factual. And I know John will always say, "Oh, well, I'm the truth" and all that, and Steve kind of thinks, but bands, you're in bands and you work in that. There's many different stories that hopefully they add up to the total is more than the sum of the parts, kind of thing. And I
mean,
think
what parts of the myth do you find the most annoying that you try to rectify in the film?
I think the whole thing about my leaving the band in the first place was kind of true, and who did what in the song writing states. And I think I booked the first several gigs because Malcolm didn't have much. I think if I hadn't done that, we'd still be rehearsing in Denmark Street.
Yeah.
But you joke it. I'm sort of half joking.
No, I'm kind of agreeing with you. Yeah.
I was quite proactive, and one of the proudest things, and I think that comes across in the movie a little bit, is that as well as being proud of my part in the Pistols and what we kind of achieved, was is portraying the scene at the time, and it was a small coterie of maybe about 20 people who were coming in and out of Malcolm's Let It Rock shop in the art school scene. To a man and to a boy and girl, they all kind of went on to do something of some kind of consequence, and I think it gets that across. Hopefully, a little bit. How important that is, I don't know. It's important to me, So,
I mean, another thing which people often forget is you were there not just when obviously with the Pistols, but you were actually there before that, working the shop, and you're one of almost very early people working the shop as well. If there's 50 people of there's a core of 50 people that the punk scene came out of. You're actually in the core of 15 or 10, aren't you?
I think I am. Yeah. Not only that, I was working there one day in the week, and the door opened, and in came Mick Ronson and Ian Hunter and this woman who turned out to be Susie Ronson. And I sold Mick Ronson a pair of pink loafers that he wore in the movie Ronaldo and Clara. And I went to see the movie a couple of years later. It's not very good. And don't have to go on a bit. In fact, I went for a pint halfway through and come back, and it still didn't make any sense. But I did tell the whole audience at the Odeon in Camden Parkway that I'd sold him those shoes. And they went, shh. There was all these different people coming in, Richard O'Brien and Reginald Bosanquet, and there'd be Nick Kent, Chrissy Hine started out there, and there'd be Brian Ferry and Anthony Price trolling up and down the King's Road. It was interesting. The whole Horror Show crowd, if I haven't mentioned them already, there was a scene, and it was exciting. As you know, I just turned 16 when I started there, and it was a bit of an eye opener. I was probably a bit
Mm.
straight, but I knew I was, and I wanted to do something about it. So it was my exit from the straight world.
It's interesting with the shop as well because, like, it was kind of an outsider shop, but also inside as well. It's still part of show business in a way, but sort of
But
on the other
it wasn't
side.
initially. I mean, it was a teddy bear shop, and Malcolm did it to be the antithesis of everything that was going on. It's just when everybody had great coats and flares and long hair, and even the milkman had hair over his ear holes, and the bank manager, and it was totally against all that. But I think they soon found out, and going back, taking a step backwards to be involved in Teddy Boys and earlier rock and roll was some kind of rebellion somehow. But he soon realised all those people were a bit stuck in the past and quite conservative, and knuckle draggers, really. Yeah, but I mean, I've only found out in recent years that when I started working there, I don't think the place had even been open a year. He didn't. Malcolm and Vivienne didn't really know exactly what they was doing. It was all City of Pants stuff. I do remember she did some t-shirts, bikers t-shirts with the sleeves cut off, and then she sewed sort of kids' bicycle tires on this and put
Oh, yeah.
slogans on, from chicken bones. It said like rock or perv or something like that. But she did say to me once, she said, Glenn, look, I don't eat meat, but I know you have to have some lunch. And she said, when you come back from the chicken place over the road, don't throw the bones away. I said, why not? She said, well, I'll take them home and boil them. And that's where she got the bones for these. It was very kind of hand to mouth.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, and you'd always want to be a working musician. You always want to play in bands. I guess, did you think this is a good place to find bands? And then on the other hand, it's kind of an
no,
odd
not that.
place to find bands.
That was a bit after. When I'd been there about 9 months, I applied to go to art college. Asked Vivienne if I don't know why I didn't ask her, but I asked her if she thought Malcolm would give me a reference, and she said, "What for?" I said, "Well, I'm going to art college if I get in." And she said, "Well, I don't think you want to ask Malcolm to give you a reference for art college." And I said, "Why not?" She said, "Well, he's been thrown out of every art college in London." Right, and I went, oh, and it made me more interested in him, and because I was interested in going to art college, he became that little bit more interested in me, and then it kind of that started coinciding with Steve and Paul coming in and hanging out, and yeah, but it's all in the movie, really.
I mean,
So,
didn't Malcolm's think was a part of his plan to get you into something he was working on? Was that always part of the idea?
no, not really. No, I think he thought I was all right. I wasn't as zip as all these weird mates that were coming in, and he had some. I mean, I used to measure the Teddy Boys up for draped jackets and things, and I had to every time he had not an address book, but he had like a little notebook with all the telephone numbers in, and it wasn't alphabetical; it was just numbers. And every time I had to flick through it to get the number, and this guy was Mr. Green in the East End. But you'd see all the other numbers, not because you was being nosy, but just to find the right place. And he had like the editor of the NME, Caroline Coon, International Times, Felix Dennis or whatever his name was from Oz magazine, Yoko Ono, the IRA. It was like, who's this bloke?
Yeah, so he's super connected, and
Yeah,
it's like an accident waiting to happen, really, this, isn't it?
yeah, really. Yeah.
I mean, so from the early days when the band was just the three of you kicking it around. I mean, did it feel like a hobby, or did it even then was a sense something different about this? Something that
No,
not just
there,
the
there
three
was
of you, but
always
also the shop and the people around it.
there was always a sense of that we're onto something somehow, even practically before we played a note. We were in what transpired to be the hippest place in London on a Saturday afternoon, just with the dint of the people coming in and out. We was right there on the same. And even I mean, even when John joined, but we did Roadrunner because Nick Kent had given us a cassette tape that his mate had produced, and he didn't quite know what to make of it. But his mate was John Cowell, and it was the Modern Lovers album that didn't come out for another year. You know, we had our finger on the pulse of all that stuff.
Mm. So yeah, so there's a sense this band is something different, or it's going to potentially be something quite different, and it's all reflected in the film as well. This kind of
Well,
sense of
hopefully,
being,
yeah, I've
yeah,
tried to do that from my kind of point of view. I did. You know, there's one bit I would have liked to clip in. There was an interview with Jerry Nolan, who I played with, kind of matey with. We didn't totally see eye to eye, but totally unheralded. He's talking about me leaving and getting Sid in the band, and he says that, you know, when they got Sid in, it just upset the whole balance of the band because Sid craved more attention than John, whereas I was kind of quite happy. I always saw myself as a bit of a John Entwistle, you know, as a foil to Townsend and Daltrey and Keith Moon, you know, really, somehow. But on the other
yeah,
side of that, I mean, Paul, great guy he is and a great drummer. You know, he was never Mr. Flamboyant, really. You know, just kind of cool and stylish, really. A bit more Charlie Watts, really, than Keith Moon. But
mm,
yeah,
yeah, well, very distinctive style. I mean, what was it like the relationships between you as band members initially before it all started to
well,
unravel?
I've said it before, and I say it because I like them. But Steve and Paul were a real double act, like Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble. You know, it's not dissonant. That's kind of how I saw it, and they were very hard to kind of break into, but we kind of ran with it. And then John finally joined, and John was John, and there was a kind of. I think the problem was, and I've said this in my book, but John always thought because he was the last one on, it was three of us against him. But it wasn't really. Like Steve and Paul were like a block vote, me, and there was a quite finely balanced triumvirate of people.
Mm, mm,
You know, and then he wanted to get his mate Sid in, who was probably bending his ear on, and get his mate on side. But it turned out Sid got a bit pissed off with John and all, you know. So,
mm.
mm.
But did you sort of feel on the outside as well, or did you? Because you played lots of bands over the years, so you have been very good at half guitar world travel, haven't you? So do you find it quite easy to slot into different
Say that
units?
again. I missed that. I didn't quite get the
Oh
last
yeah,
bit.
you know, because you played in lots of groups over the years, so you
Yeah.
kind of you've always been, you know, joining a band, different people, get to know them, play, make it a unit. And this starts in the Pistols. So did you feel on the outside as well, like John did?
With Steve and Paul a little bit. I probably still do a little bit. You know, we're kind of
Yeah.
mates. I mean, they've always been the kind of double act that they are. I don't think that's ever going to change, but they grew up together, you know. You
Mm.
can't really break into that. You know, we're friendly enough and it works, but you don't need to live in. I mean, the thing is, Steve always wants pie and mash, and it's all right once in a while, but not all the fucking time. Just little things like that, but you know.
How did it become a creative unit? Because you know you're thrown together in a way, aren't you? So you know, I guess initially people, you know, well, it was initially, you know, different people contributing bits, tunes, riffs, or whatever. Did it slowly become a situation because you had a melodic ear that you would mold them into songs?
Kind of like to think so. I think we all had our own likes, but we also all knew we didn't want to sound like this, that, or the other, but we was going to do it anyway. And everybody sort of brought their small little influences to the table. But I will say this: I found Steve and Paul, although they worked through things, they was always a bit lazy. And I think a lot of the songs, not that I wrote them all, but some I did. But you know, like Problems comes from us playing the same thing over and over and having to go at something else that didn't work. And I just started playing that bass riff. Down, 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 just come out of nowhere. And then because we were together, Steve, we couldn't keep doing that all the time. Steve had another bit and Paul was there. And then John had some ideas for some. And that's probably the only one song that was a joint four-way split
Mm.
kind of song. But I feel I was the instigator of it by just starting. We can't keep doing the same thing. Here you go. And I think that was a bit like that with everything. Probably pissed them off a little bit. All clever clogs.
Got to start somewhere,
Somebody
but
has to be.
their contribution is equally important because the sound of Steve's guitar and Paul's drums
Yeah.
will make a
I've,
riff
I've,
sound like yeah.
I've never kind of said anything against it because that's true.
Mm.
I think the inherent, I was always a big fan of all the pirate radio station in the 60s and Ready Steady Go and all the British beat bands that came, well, a bit later, Small Faces and Kinks and Who and the Yardbirds and all that, and all those bands that were on Ready Steady Go. And every song, especially the Tamla Motown stuff, every song is like a little 3.5 minute opera,
Mm.
It's of some kind of consequence, and not all bring down the government, but it's got the topic that revolves around it, and that was always a good yardstick for my kind of writing, and even with the stuff that maybe Steve would come up with. But the game was to kind of mould it into a song a little bit more, and I think that's what I brought to the table.
Do you find frustrating, when Malcolm said you can get any four people, that, the Pistols weren't musical, they weren't musicians, when actually, in fact, it's one of the greatest rock and roll bands the country's ever produced. And it wasn't just about the clothes and the attitude. It actually, the great pop songs, it's a great pop album.
Yeah, pop rock. Don't forget pop rock, right? But
Mm.
yeah, I
Mm.
think Malcolm believed that, and he didn't realise that we actually were any good. I think that's the one thing that Malcolm didn't realise. But everything he said kind of worked towards the way it ended up. So
Oh, yeah. I
we'll
mean, the pop cultural antenna he had and his vision is completely brilliant, but it does make me laugh, but it's really obvious he didn't realise how good the band were.
yeah, yeah, funny old life.
So was it a sweet spot where you and John worked together and it was kind of good?
Yeah, I think kind of when we actually sat and co-write Submission together because Steve and Paul hadn't turned up for a rehearsal, and we sloped off to the pub, and he said, Have you seen Malcolm? And I said, yeah. He said, he said anything? I said, no. Oh, I said, oh, yeah. He said, why don't you write a song called Submission? And John went, what, like all kind of bondage and, domination and all that. Like, we kind of guessed so. And he went, And then one of us said, how about a submarine mission? And we just sat in the pub and swapped line. He said one line and I said the other one. And then we kind of wrote the song there and there, and I just went home and worked out. Next time we rehearsed, I said, I got this song. Of course, Steve and Paul made it sound like the Sex Pistols, but
Mm.
and then that's when we did our Spunk demos. Not long after that, and with Dave Goodman, and then Steve's blowing in the kettle and all to get the bubbly under the water. It was kind of funny, We just thought we was onto something, and then we went to Paris. That was kind of good, We'd done the punk thing, and then we signed to EMI, and it was all. It was like a snowball effect thing, Just like what you was doing was beginning to prove to have been worthwhile. And do you know the other thing and all? I mean, I applied and got into art college, and then I did a foundation course, and then I got into do a degree in fine art painting at St Martin's, which I didn't realise was quite a big deal. But in the summer holidays, I decided to take the Pistols seriously, and I went in on the first day and booked the Pistols, and then went to the bursar's office and said, "I'm not joining. I'm not coming. You can give my place to somebody else. I'm joining a rock and roll band." And I thought I was going to say, "Oh no, Glenn, we needed you, right?" And they went, "All right then." So I had to get on with doing the Pistols, to make it work.
I
So
mean, did it feel like it had a longevity to it, or did you always feel there was some kind of inbuilt obsolescence?
did he think past the end of the week, to be honest, in those days?
Mm.
Still don't, I still don't
Mm.
understand that if you wanting to get a few people together and you want to go and do a gig next week. That these days you got to book it 6 months in advance. It's
Yeah.
that annoys me. It annoys me when I want to go to Nîmes in the south of France. Tomorrow, and there's no flights available because how dare people book in advance? It takes all the spontaneity out of life. Yeah.
I mean, do you think in a way, looking back with the film, with the book, that it was a perfect thing about the band? One classic album changes everything. You do your contribution and you're gone. You're gone before the record's out, 8 months before. It's
Well,
it's so fast and such a
yeah,
powerful statement.
it's the way it was.
Mm.
You can't backtrack and change that. I had never really moaned about that at all. It was the way it was. I did think if you want to get Sid in the band, like that Harry Enfield show sketch when there's him and Paul Whitehouse in the pub, like older skinheads blokes, and the punchline is, well, if that's what you want, that's what's going to happen. I always thought kind of that. I think I was kind of proved right, really, but I think I've been skirted over a bit. I must admit, we started making this movie before we reformed with Frank Carter. I think if we'd already reformed by then, maybe I wouldn't have gone ahead with it. But I have done, and it's fine. I think it stands up. I've had a couple of screenings, one at the Barbican, which was sold out, and people said they loved it. So, and there'll
Well,
always be naysayers, but I haven't found any so far.
well, people love the story, don't they? It is like
Yeah,
Robin Hood and his merry men. It's one of the great urban myths of our country, isn't
yeah,
it?
but maybe my story is hopefully not Friar Tuck, but perhaps I'm more Alan the Gale or something. Well, what's the other characters? It's not Maid Marian. There's Friar Tuck.
That's
There's a sheriff
Jordan.
of Nottingham. I'm not. That's probably Malcolm.
Yeah. See, it all
John
fits, doesn't it?
is Robin Hood. Perhaps Steve's Friar Tuck after all the pies. I think one of them is Alan the Dale. Yeah, there you go.
Looking back, do you feel sad the way it is with John now? It's obviously, um, his attitude, very negative attitude to the band and to the ex-members, whatever you do, isn't it? Do you sometimes just want to give him a big cuddle and say, we're in the trenches together once.
You know what? I feel I tried to do that in '96 and after that, and it was kind of dismissed really with John. So I think he's painted himself into the corner,
Mm,
both kind of friendship wise and politically. You know,
mm.
I find him a bit. I find him like Arthur Askey. Just sort of doing the same old musical act all of
Yeah.
his life.
But
Maybe I don't. He was great back then.
I was going to ask that, with the film, watching the film, the memories come back and you sit there and watch what you go, wow, he was utterly iconic in that period. And the way he delivered the songs really added something to great songs, didn't it?
Yeah, 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 totally. But yeah, it's not the only thing in life.
Yeah. I mean,
When
and
you're older,
lyrically,
it's different. And I always say, when somebody's great on stage, it's great. And if what they do needs them to be like that, it's kind of fine, and we run with it at the time. But when you're pushing 70, to be in the back of a van with somebody, it's just too much.
oh, yeah, I mean, it is very much a teenage Sex Pistol
Mm.
situation that works. And yeah, has to be
Yeah,
different now. I mean, go back to Sid. Do you often wonder why he wanted to be the bass player so much? I mean, surely he should have been an iconic singer in his own right, shouldn't he?
yeah. I don't think he even considered that at the time. Um, I think he just wanted in on the action, and he felt left out. With John, when we did gigs, and then Sid wasn't really around at the very, very beginning, and he started appearing. And when we did a gig, he'd always create trouble to get the attention off of John and around him. I just think he attention all the time. Um, don't know, whatever I say about Sid is going to sound like sour grapes. But, after the Pistols then split up with Sid after America and all that, I did that one off gig with him. And yes, he was a good singer, but he was a good singer in the way that Elvis is. I mean, Elvis never really wrote his own songs. He was
Mm.
good at singing it, but maybe only did covers when me song. In fact, in the movie, there's Chris Stein, who I met Blondie at that gig. They came down on their night off. That's where I met Clem for the first time. And he said, we was only doing a few numbers for a laugh, and it became this big thing at the Electric Ballroom sold out, and we had to keep playing. We did the same set 3 times. He said he did. I want to be your dog 3 times. It's like, well, maybe we finally got it right. But there's a guy. He's not in the movie, but it was a big wheel in the music business through the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, called Robb Dickens, and he signed me to Warner Chappell Publishing. And I'd always go and see him with some idea I had or something like that. And he said to me once, he said, "You know what, Glenn?" He said, "Yeah, well, the best thing you ever had was." And I said, "Well, it was the Pistols, wasn't it?" He went, "No, no." I said, "What?" And he said, "The Vicious White Kids." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "That was so exciting." I said, "Well, why didn't you say anything and sign us up?" He went, "Well, you was all too out of it." But there was quite a lot coming from him.
Well, that was it not an awkward gig to play, or was it just obviously not because he did it, isn't it?
Well, we did it because we were neighbours and we were supposed to be mortal enemies, and we were sat sitting next to each other in the pub. You know, it had a conversation. Why? I mean, I've put this in my book, but you know, we're supposed to be enemies, but we're sitting here. And he said, "What can we do about it?" And I said, "Well, I don't know that we have to do anything about it, but we could do a gig for a laugh."
Mm.
Well, that's a good idea. Who should we get? And I said, "Get Steve New from the Rich Kids, and maybe Rat Scabies from." But he wasn't in the Damned then. He'd fallen out with them. He had a band called the White Cats.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, who's going to play bass?" And I said, "Well, look, I'll put it this way, I'm not going to sing." And he went, "Well, who's going to sing then?" I said, "Well, how about you sing and I play bass?" And he went, "Oh, all right. And that's where we got the name from. The Sid Vicious, me and Steve were in the Rich Kids, and then Rat was in the White Cats, so the Vicious White
Mm.
Kids. I
So
don't know if
it,
I'm trying to get away with that these days, but
so even when the obvious move for him to be a solo singer was handed to him on the plate, he still didn't even get it.
well, he did. He got into it once we did it.
Mm.
But then he was going to America straight after that, and then he did the similar thing with
Mm.
the people at Max's Kansas City, whoever was around, like Nolan and Steve Dior and I think Mick Jones.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it became very dark with drugs
Mm.
and things, which it was a bit here. But I didn't actually realise how bad Sid was. I thought he was a bit of a liability, but I didn't realise that Malcolm had been keeping him deliberately short of money, so he didn't put her up at his arm. And when we did the gig, drunkenly after the show, they said, "Well, look, here's your takings for the show." And we'd sold out the Electric Ballroom, which was a fair few bob then. And I said, "Well, why don't we just go as a farewell present to Sid?" And he never said no. And he went off to America a few days later and turned up with, a couple of grand, which was a good few bob then. And him turning up in the East Village with all this money, all the wrong ones must have been like flies around ship.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's naivety as well. Just it wouldn't
Yeah.
take much to get that off him, would it? So,
Yeah.
like, we're getting towards the end of the time slot here. So, I mean, is there a potential follow up to this film? Like, I was an old age Sex Pistol,
Oh,
like this, book
no, that would
film of
be
this tour.
I am. That would be I am an older.
Oh yeah,
But
present tense. Yeah.
I think it's kind of not a bad title because I was. Some people go, "Oh, teenage," yeah, but I was. We all were.
Mm, mm.
We were all teenage Sex Pistols, pushing our 20s a little bit, admittedly, but when they
But
started out, I was like 17 and a half, 18.
who'd have
That's,
thought then that the band could sound as good now when everyone's pushing 70?
well, I think over the years, we've all kept playing and doing different stuff with different people. We were never kind of slouches once we learnt to play in the first place. And we've kept our chops up. Paul's always done stuff. Steve's done stuff if the money's right. I've kept it. And Frank's been out gigging, so it doesn't really surprise me. What does surprise me is people who think, oh, it's going to be terrible, but they never consider the fact that none of us want egg on our faces, and we wouldn't do it if we didn't think it was any good. No, there's the
No,
fact people might think it's good and it ain't, but but we're not schmucks, So
no. It sounds great. We're about to run out of time, Glenn.